Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. And on today's show, I've got Natalie Allport. Natalie is a former national team snowboarder, speaker, multi-sport athlete, and lifelong entrepreneur. She hosts the All In with Natalie Allport podcast and is a passionate advocate for athlete mental health. She also runs a digital marketing agency, 93 Agency, with over a decade of experience in social media, sports marketing, and personal branding. So welcome onto the show, Natalie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So obviously we'll go right back to the beginning of you as a snowboarder. What was it for you that drove you towards that sport in particular?
Yeah, great question because I was like, I wasn't into those types of sports at first, actually. I've been like a lifelong athlete. I did grow up skiing a little bit when I was very, very young. We didn't go super often, but we did live near the mountains. Then we moved away from the mountains and hockey became my main sport. So that was like everything for me, especially as a Canadian kid. And so that was what I thought my path would be. I played hockey, and then at school I played basketball, soccer, all those team sports. I got into skateboarding. I really enjoyed it. And then one day, my family we rented some skis. We went to the mountain, and I saw that all like the cool guys in my school were snowboarding. And so I was like, you know what? I want to be cool. I'm gonna try to do this. And I always was trying to keep up with the guys in my class. So whatever they were doing, I was like trying to butt in. Like I even played boys baseball as the only girl on the team. So I just did all of that stuff. So I traded in my ski rentals for a snowboard and just didn't look back. And shockingly, like as a kid, I was kind of a natural athlete in most sports. Snowboarding, not at all. It did not come easy. It took a lot of work. I was not good at first. I think it bruised my ego a little bit, and that's maybe why I just wanted to take on that challenge and try to get good at it because I wasn't good originally.
And what particular discipline of snowboarding did you do? Because obviously it's branched out massively into, and this is going to test my knowledge of winter sport now, big air. Obviously you got the, what's the extreme one when they jump out of a helicopter? You got that as well. And then also you've got the tricks one. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, so there's so many different disciplines, and so there's slopestyle, which is like all the jumps on the rails. There's big air, which is just hitting a big jump. There's even like rail jams. People just compete and they just hit like the rails and do tricks on the rails. That's not in the Olympics. Slopestyle is in the Olympics. Big air is in the Olympics. Half pipe, where you kind of have that half pipe if you can picture it. Sadly, in Canada, it's so expensive to build a half pipe that we don't have many. So that was not my thing because it's very hard to access one. And then there is racing as well. That's another whole type of discipline. Snowboard, cross. Those are also in the Olympics. And then like the helicopter and all that stuff, as like backcountry and you film, that's not in the Olympics. And so when I started off, I did slope style. I also did big air and the rail jams. And big air actually just got added to the Olympics just for the last Olympics. It wasn't even in the Olympics in 2014. 2014 was when they first put slopestyle in. Half pipe's been in for a long time, and racing's been in for a long time, but never did any of the racing. I was all about the tricks.
And what, out of slopestyle and big air, which one do you prefer? Obviously, it's a difficult
I
question.
preferred slopestyle because I liked like the flow of the run, right? Like you land something and immediately it's on to the next feature. You have to put something together creatively. I also like for big air, it's all about like just that biggest trick. The things people are doing now is so crazy. Like one of my friends, she won gold, not at this past X Games, but I think she won. I think she got a bronze at the past X Games, but she got a gold in big air at X Games a few years ago. And that's just the things she's doing now compared to like the things that we were doing when I was still competing and with her. It's just on a whole other level. And so I like the flow of putting a whole run together.
Do you go into a run having a preconceived idea of what you're going to do, or is it very much influenced on the fly of seeing where you're obviously in competition you've got to outdo your competition, but which one would you more steer towards? Because ultimately you got your conservative view on just obviously getting through the run, or do you go
Yeah.
all out?
So usually you have your run planned out. You'd work with your coaches. You have usually you have a few days or a week of training on that specific course. So you'll kind of look at it and each day like build a run together based on the tricks that you have, right? Like you can show up at competition. This girl has way better tricks and you just know that's going to happen, but who knows, she could fall and you could succeed. So you really just put a run together based on what you can do, less based on like what the competitors around you are doing, based on the course, how things are feeling, how things are landing for you throughout the week. Perhaps you have your biggest tricks, but it's just not, you don't want to risk falling. At most competitions, you have 2 or 3 runs. So you might want to try to put down your safety run. If you land it, then you might go for like, okay, this is my, more risky run. And if you don't land it, you might stick to your safety run. Some of those things do adjust. Like if your competitors are falling, you're like, okay, I'm not going to go for my risky run because I know that just landing my safety run could get me in a good position to qualify for finals, for example.
And then obviously you throw caution to the wind once it comes to, obviously anybody can win when it comes into the finals.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, it depends, right? Like if you're trying to qualify and you have to get like, okay, a top 5, there might be some mind games in there where you're like, okay, I need to just get 5th. Let me land this. Then from there, I'll take risk. Or there are definitely some athletes out there that you see that they don't care. They want to land their biggest trick and they go all or nothing, like win or not. So there's people play different games when it comes to, their goals and the specific competition for sure.
And in the past, Natalie, which kind of camp did you lie in? The ones that are a little bit more conservative, or the ones that let's throw caution to the wind?
So I would play on both sides, definitely. I know, like even just like the rail jams and those competitions, my parents would come. Like they weren't able to travel to all these competitions around the world, but then to the local rail jams that were more for fun, they would come and they would get so annoyed because I would be like wanting to land this trick that's in my head, and if I was falling, I just didn't care. I just wanted to land that, and they're like, "Why don't you just do these other tricks? You would have won." And I was like, "Well, because I wanted to do this, and like that's what I wanted to show to people." And so I played on both sides depending on the situation. As I definitely was someone who was like, take the risk. If I fall, who cares? Like all or nothing. But as I started progressing and all of a sudden you're trying to, make different teams, qualify for different levels, there was more of like, okay, you just need a top 20. You just need to land this, at least put a run down so you get some points up on the board. So that transitioned as I had better coaching with the national team. There's different points you need to even stay on or qualify for the next year. So it changed as it went, but I think my natural tendency was more like, let's go. But my coaches really had to teach me the other side of things.
You have to kind of be help, kind of pull the reins back. Then it's like, no, Natalie, a little bit of calm.
Yeah, now I compete, or I competed after I stepped away from my snowboard career in the sport of CrossFit, and that's one where pacing is very important, and I still have not learned that lesson. I'm like, let me go hard, and if I burn out, I burn out. That's definitely something that my coaches in that sport have had to work into my mindset.
Is that more to do with the I won't say win at all cost mentality that sport has, but that transition from snowboarding to obviously CrossFit, you know your body better than anybody else. Is it because of the naivety that you have towards the new discipline? It's like, what? I know what I can do, but obviously the weight's going to catch up to me.
Yeah. I mean, somewhat for sure. I think it's just like, you get all hyped up and you're like, let me just do this. And sometimes it comes down to, right, like you might be paying too much attention to the people beside you and what they're doing and let that affect you. So you go for something that you're not going to be able to sustain per se. But for me, I think part of it is definitely like when I stepped into CrossFit, I was very new at it. And so I'm definitely not coming from an endurance background. Like my snowboarding background it's like a power sport. Like your run takes less than 2 minutes. So there's a ton of lactic acid being built up. You're landing these things, but then you're sitting on the chairlift and going up. So it's like rest, recover, or go hard and recover. And I took the same mentality when it came to CrossFit. But if there's like a 10K run and that's not how you should approach it. So yeah, partially was definitely just being naive and going into it that way and just realizing that I could actually work on building endurance rather than just being like, okay, how about I just use my sprint and recover and try to always tackle these endurance tasks with that.
But what kind of persuaded you to transition to CrossFit?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many, like the main reasons I stepped away from the sport of CrossFit or the sport of snowboarding had nothing to do with CrossFit. But for me, I'd started it a year before I had retired from my snowboarding career. I was always into strength and conditioning. Obviously, being a national athlete, that's a huge part of what you do. And I was convinced to start doing Olympic lifting to work on my explosiveness, and that transitioned into like people telling me, "Oh, you'd be so good at CrossFit." I was learning Olympic lifting at a CrossFit gym. So I picked that up really quickly and started. I was surrounded by some people who were CrossFit Games athletes, and they were like, "You can do this." So when I was dealing with like the emotional fallout of leaving the sport of snowboarding, I had already started doing CrossFit, and I said, might as well just dive into this, right? Like exercise is great for your mental health. I can still feel like a competitive athlete. I was progressing really fast, so I had all these opportunities to compete, compete with others, compete with myself. And so I just spent all my time doing that and dove right into that. And now with the pandemic, obviously there's no competitions. Had a motorbike accident just before the year before the pandemic started. And so that kind of put me off. So I haven't competed in, it's been almost 2 years, which is absolutely mental because it's been over a decade since I haven't, been kind of like a full-time athlete and competing in anything from snowboarding to CrossFit. So it's been good to learn about myself outside of just competing all the time.
So if we transition nicely and smooth into the interview, then what possessed you to go into branding, marketing, and social media then?
Yeah, so part of that, it really came from my snowboard career. So as a snowboard athlete, and especially competing at these world events, like the top athletes, they're basically the X Games world champions, and you're competing against them, and they're getting paid by Red Bull and all these companies a ton of budget. For example, the best female athlete at the time, she's still like the best snowboarder. She was sponsored by Billabong, and so was I. But I'm not going to get any sort of budget as she is from Billabong when I'm competing at the same events as her, and she's winning, and I'm fighting, to come 15th. So when it came to that, I was like, how can I be creative with marketing myself and getting unique sponsors that some of these people aren't tapping into? So I'm not competing in the exact same lane as them. Especially I didn't have all the resources in the world. I didn't have my parents being like, we're going to pay for everything. It was completely on me. And so I was like, I need sponsorships to make this happen. And so learning how to market myself, get sponsors, use social media to do so, as social media was starting to kind of grow and Instagram started and all those things. One of my sponsors actually asked me if I could do all their social media. They knew I was in business school and had an entrepreneurship background, wanted to start my own business. So it really kickstarted with that. And then, of course, as I stepped away from the sport, I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to be a full-time entrepreneur and just build up my client list and work on this. So it really comes from what I had to learn myself. And now I've gone full circle and trying to teach athletes how to do the same thing. Because if I didn't learn that, I might have had to step away from the sport earlier if I didn't have the finances to even travel to some of these competitions.
And and historically, Natalie, have the extreme sports and maybe some of the contact sports been more what's the word I want to use? Go very hand in hand with Instagram or Twitter for their little bit of, it's attention grabbing and it's quick.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like those sports are so sponsor driven, right? Like you see a sport like let's say like skeleton, that's in the Olympics. Those sports they have to fight for sponsorships, and a lot of times they have like corporate sponsors because it looks good to be sponsoring these Olympic athletes and so on. But it's hard for them to get these like new age brands, like these cool brands on board because what they do doesn't lend itself exactly to filming and sharing content. When it comes to like snowboarding, like we're always out there with our video camera filming each other, posting clips, taking cool photos. It goes to a younger audience. I think snowboarding was one of the most watched, if not the most watched, winter sport at the last few Olympics. So there's definitely a lot of sponsor attention. And so for me, I was like, how can I get these brands that haven't capitalized on snowboarding into the sport? Because like I said, with competing against those snowboard brands, there's obviously like a lot of money there, but at the same time, if there's a bad winter, those snowboard brands aren't selling that much, and all of a sudden their budget is cut and they're dropping athletes from their team. So I didn't want to rely on that. I had to figure out some other alternatives. But yeah, to your question, snowboarding it's a unique sport in that sense when you consider all like the Olympic sports that it's so sponsor driven. And before it was even an Olympic sport, everyone had these big sponsors because of events like X Games, because of these clips and videos that you can post and promote.
And as probably the year has gone on, and ultimately social media's caught on across probably every genre of sport. How inventive have you had to become to stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can carve your own lane for sure because everyone is so unique. That's one of the benefits is as social media has blown up, a lot of people are saying, well, is there still opportunity for me? Someone else is snowboarding, someone else is posting fitness, someone else is doing this. But as more people are posting, there's also more people consuming content. And you're going to find your people if you're sharing your unique story. Someone might resonate with my story more than they might resonate with, the top snowboarder or whatever, just because of where I'm at in my journey or how I share my story or how different my story is with my background. And so I definitely think there's still a ton of opportunities out there for everyone to carve their own lane.
And how do you stand out nowadays? Because ultimately everybody has Instagram, everybody has Facebook, everybody has Twitter. Ultimately, YouTube has evolved as well. How do you, in some instances, go against the grain and become or show? I won't say become unique, but showcase your skill sets.
Yeah, for me personally, it's just being authentic and showing up, right? And I just share my story, the highs and the lows, the failures. I go back and share some of the things that I went through during my transition from snowboarding. I just give some more depth, right? Like there's some people who they might just post like a hype photo. A lot of athletes, they don't tune into social media. Once a month, they'll post this like hype photo, like I scored a goal or this happened. And people are really resonating with the real content, like wanting to know what really goes on behind the scenes. What are you doing? What's your thought process behind these things? And so I just try to document the journey and share it authentically. And I think everyone can do that, and it will never really be truly saturated because everyone, the more people that come on, the more people there are that might resonate with your story uniquely. And so if everyone's being authentic, not trying to be someone else, you're going to attract the people who are going to follow with that.
Obviously, with you being you putting your marketing hat on now, Natalie, what's this fascination with the behind the scenes for the ordinary person in the street wanting to see every aspect of a sportsman's life?
Yeah, so I think what's the coolest part about athletes and sharing their story and why athletes can really build this audience and be kind of unique, build a unique influence in this space is because they example these traits that people want to build, whether it's motivation or inspiration, but they can really display it physically. It's so much easier than someone just filming their philosophy or trying to document them working on a computer or whatever. Athletes have they can post this video that just kind of motivates someone all of a sudden or educate someone on the work it goes into to be a high performer on any facet of life. Like as a mom, they could look into an athlete story and be like, okay, I want to be the best mom I can be, and they can learn something from that athlete's story. And so it's just so easily relatable because you can physically see these things documented in these character traits where it might not be as easy to do that in different aspects and in different careers.
So let me ask you this then, Natalie. What motivated you as an athlete?
So just to be the best that I could be. Like I knew as a kid, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to just have fun and live life the way I wanted. And that involves sport. I love competing. I love what I learned about myself through competing. Like at the end of a competition, win or lose, there's so many lessons that you learn and that you can reflect on. And it's hard to get that same atmosphere in other aspects. Definitely you can kind of do it in business and other ways, but just that feeling of and that adrenaline, that's just something I was always chasing and just pushing myself to be my best and keep reaching my potential and just be happy. And sports made me happy, and so that's what I did.
And were there ever times throughout your career that people came in and kind of said, "Well, you're not doing particularly well. Bring up ultimately, you're trying to compete with the number one snowboarder for the same sort of contract." Had there been times that people said, "Well, why don't you get a 9 to 5 job and have a little bit of security?"
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there were times I think it was almost the opposite. Like when I stepped away, people were wondering, "Hey, you're on track for the 2018 Olympics. Why are you stepping away so soon? Like, why are you doing this?" So I definitely got asked because I was doing university at the same time of competing with the national team. People would say, "Well, what are you going to do when you finish school?" I was like, "Well, the same thing I'm going to do now." So I wouldn't say anyone said like, "Hey, are you going to get a 9 to 5?" my parents believed in me. They just wanted to see me happy, whatever made me happy. Most people around me the same. And I was surrounded by all these other people who were pursuing their best. And so I would say I don't think I got asked that at all. But I definitely, you got the questions, and especially as an entrepreneur, I got those questions like, what are you going to do when you finish your business school? I'm like, the same thing. I already have my business started and I'm snowboarding and being an athlete. I'm just going to continue building off that.
Did I'm asking a two-part question. Was there any ever apprehension of going away from sport and going all in on entrepreneurship? And then to follow on from your answer where people were saying, well, what were you going to do after business school? Did you ever think to second guess, have I got this right?
I mean, I think it's part of life to always be second guessing, have I got this right? I just knew since I was a kid, like me working for someone else in an office is just not going to not going to be suited to my personality. And so I just always knew I was like, I want to be an athlete and I want to be an entrepreneur. And I knew even if I did become the world champion or whatever it was, I still wanted to pursue those business passions because those passions were there. So it wasn't even like a fallback. It was like I was still passionate about this. I think there was definitely apprehension of people wondering why I stepped away from the sport when it's like I was still on the trajectory up. It wasn't like I had been, I was 30 and kind of falling off or anything. And yeah, so I think there's definitely, those second guessings of should I have stuck with the sport longer? Should I have done this? But all in all, it was best for my mental health to step away, and I'm happy with what I'm doing now. And even just looking back at the sport now and watching it, I'm like, you know what, I miss it. I miss all those experiences, but I don't want to be doing all those triple flips and all the crazy things that you see now on X Games. I'm like, for me, it wasn't worth it to risk, my body and my mental health anymore.
And you mentioned mental health, and obviously we're just living in obviously these tough times for everybody, and ultimately everybody kind of being on a spectrum of how they're dealing with it in terms of their mental health. How you mentioned mental health in terms of sport playing a massive factor towards it. Are you all right with delving into that in terms of explaining what you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, 100%. Mental health and like just being an advocate for it is a huge part of who I am now, especially from what I had to deal with. For me, like during my snowboard career, there was times that I dealt with a lot of anxiety attacks and I didn't know what they were or what they were coming from. So I kind of just ignored it and put it to the wayside. And eventually, when it came to my final season in snowboarding, I just reached this point where every single day I was living the life that I had dreamed of as a kid, and I just wasn't happy, and I just couldn't figure out what it was. I'm like, every day I'm waking up, I'm in this place that's so beautiful. I always wanted to be here and do this. I'm a full-time athlete. Like, why am I just not happy? And then I felt guilty, which sends you into a whole lower spiral because I was saying, everyone at home keeps messaging me how lucky I am to be here. People don't understand that you're not immune from mental health if you're successful or living up these things that project external success. You can still deal with internal struggle. And so when I did step away from the sport, I dealt with a lot of a period of depression, anxiety, especially a loss of identity of who I was without this being the title of national team athlete. Would people even want to hang out with me? If I got introduced at parties, what's interesting about me now? I dealt with all those things, and it's definitely really hard. And I think anyone who's going through any transition, like if they dedicated 2 decades or a decade of their life to something and all of a sudden have to step away from it or just make the choice to step away from it, even if it's within their control, just dealing with that and that identity loss is really difficult.
And did you ever find what the trigger was for your panic attacks?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just I was so focused on achievement. Like that my whole life was like, I want to prove this to people who doubted me. I want to achieve this and I'll be happy when I achieve this rather than like really just being happy in the moment. And some of that came with maturity and time because I did have some people around me, family members who recognized that early on. And I was just so driven that I was like, ignore everyone. I'm just going to focus on doing what I want to do. And the highs and lows of sport are just that you go so high and you go so low. Every day I was just so focused, like I need to land these tricks so that at the end of the season, I'll be able to work on these next level tricks. And if I didn't land it, it was like, that was a failure of a day. When it was like, how I can't control that. All I can control is that I'm trying and I'm showing up and doing my best. So tricks will happen. People will progress at their own rate. And I'm happy to be in a place where I've learned that now. I've matured so much since I stepped away from the sport. And I think that was what I was realizing in my last season, was that staying in the sport with that mindset was holding me back from learning all these things. So going through that low once I stepped away has just kind of rocketed my mindset into having to learn all these things that I think if I stayed with it, I wouldn't have learned.
Do you think, obviously, the evolution of social media has given, rightly or wrongly, the younger generation an advantage of, say someone like yourself or myself, who had to some extent find our way by making mistakes? Do you think if they were to really intricately look at social media and look at both the successes of an athlete, but also the moments of adversity or failure, and look, well, okay, this is what they did particularly wrong, let me put that under a fine microscope, as human beings will do, but pull out the gems, the pretty much the diamond in the rough, as well, okay, this is the lesson to be learned from it, and we'll put the other things aside. Do you think if they were to do that, ultimately they need to make their own mistakes as well, but do you think that's going to enable them to be more conscious of mental health and being able to not self-diagnose, but being able to be more aware of panic attacks, what it looks like, what does it feel like, and then ultimately be able to seek out the right support?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think as much as I did have, family who were saying, get some balance in your life, do some of these things, and I was blocking it out. I definitely think so. For example, that's one of the reasons why I do share my story and try to be open about the things that I go through on my social media, is because I know the next generation is watching. And if they can learn everything that really goes into it, instead of just like, hey, every day is great, I'm living my best life, I'm out here just traveling and doing these things, that doesn't, all of a sudden they get attached to just that result, and they'll sacrifice anything to make that happen, including their mental health, rather than realizing that that cost a lot for me. And if they can learn that lesson, it's like, what, let's prioritize my mental health while I'm in this journey. Let's realize that the process is everything. Let's focus on these things. And so for sure they can learn so much faster. They can see learn from the failures of other people. I think we learn more from failures than we do from success. And they can see what really goes into it. For example, just the awareness and the benefit of the awareness of these top pro athletes in the NFL and MLB and NHL and all these things that are now coming out and sharing their mental health struggles and their stories. That has such a huge ripple effect for the next generation in sport. I think it's just so important that people see this and realize that you're not immune. It's okay to seek help. It's okay to talk about it, and that can only make you a better athlete in the long run.
Do you think it's because we've lived in for so many decades worth of, this kind of idea of gladiator, I don't think it's a word, but gladiatorism, and ultimately athletes going out and trying to wear a suit of armor because we know in us, deep down in ourselves, sniff any little bit of weakness in somebody, you're gonna ultimately you're gonna be that dog, and you're gonna sniff out and ultimately try and pretty much stomp them out. But do you think because of that machismo or very masculine way of approaching something, it's gonna take a while to ultimately, I think obviously the generation, I think Z, as they like to be called, have pretty much nipped that in the bud a little bit, because there's like, well, I will work this amount of hours, but I want to be recompensed for that. But obviously generations before that, well, I have to do it because of end result of what you were talking about. Do you think, obviously, as we transition away from, it's going to take a while, I think, in sport, because sport is it's obviously doesn't like to relate to life. Ultimately, obviously, you're going to learn a lot, like you said, from sport into life. But do you think it's going to take maybe a couple of decades to kind of say, well, this way of thinking is prehistoric, and we need to be a little bit more empathetic towards oneself and look after, ultimately, number one, which we know how to do as athletes, but look at ultimately what is in between the ears more so than the nutritional, the physical, and ultimately the being the best athlete you can.
Yeah, I think things are progressing that way for sure, especially with the rise of these top athletes saying like mindset and your mental health, both two different things. Like they're the same thing, but different things. I look at them like mental health. Like you can have a top mindset. Like I would say I was so driven, so competitive. Like I showed up every day. I was disciplined. Like those are some of the mindset skills. But at the same time, I didn't have some conversely some skills that balance that off to learn that it's okay to rest. It's okay to take care of my mental health. It's okay to be dealing with some of these things or seek help. And I think we're really starting to realize that now. I think even the pandemic has shifted that because now everyone's talking about mental health. And so I think that's really important. I definitely see that only being helpful, right? Because we have for sure, like you said, this masculine view of, go, 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 be tough, don't show any weakness, and that's how you achieve success. But now we're having the top athletes in the world say, no, that's not how you achieve success, actually. You can do it this way and in a more holistic and sustainable manner where people are staying in sport for longer. They're having happier careers, happier lives by focusing on that. And so I think that's going to change. And the next generations coming up will realize that they can still pursue high performance in whatever they want to do, sport, business, life, with a balanced approach and with taking care of their mental health on the journey.
Do you think that's a difficult one? Because obviously social media portrays, as you'll know in your day-to-day life, mostly I'll say fictitious lifestyle, because they have obviously a little bit it's died down a little bit because it's ultimately it's not achievable because of mass travel is not being allowed. But do you think social media themselves, and I'm talking the platforms now, have to bear some of the brunt of that responsibility? I know Twitter clamped down on Trump eventually, but do you think some of that responsibility needs to be at the top as well, to kind of say, you give somebody too much power, which in a sense is influence, and if somebody is not to be able to say, if I was to use just a term, black and white, what is right and was wrong for themselves because of being on social media too much, how is that young individual supposed to ultimately see right from wrong? Because if they're deeming this is probably what's wrong, and this is my opinion, if they're getting all their information from somebody they deem influential in their lives, an athlete, a musician, a celebrity, whatever you want to call it, do you think this is where social media needs to grow a conscience, or that individual needs to grow a conscience as well? What you're telling a preteen or somebody 13, 14, 15 years old, and if it's a male, it's probably even worse, but they can't be able to see through that, I was about to say red mist, but be able to see through that euphoric sense of, well, I want to be just like that individual, and whatever they say is gospel.
Yeah, great question, because I was literally in a clubhouse room this morning with a bunch of like health and fitness professionals and I chimed in on this exact same topic, and they were saying like, whose responsibility is this? People look up to these influencers and they're, saying to do this when that's not what they did, to say to get their body or whatever. And so my story was last year I started posting a lot on TikTok, and I grew a large audience there, and some of my workout videos kind of took off, and there's a lot of young girls saying, I want your body. I'm going to have your body in 1 year. I put it as the background of my phone. And I was like, what? This is so crazy. So I was making sure that I responded to those people and said, hey, like, I believe in you. Whatever you want to achieve, you can do in sport. But like, I train for performance specifically in sport. And two, I've been training. Like, if you ask me when I started training, I'm not going to say, yeah, I achieved this in 3 years. It was like, I started since birth. Like, I played all these different sports. Then I was a national athlete. Then I did CrossFit. So you want to, give people the real stuff, because otherwise they say, oh, this person's doing this. I want to achieve this in 1 year. And it's like, hey, no, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just sharing like this workout that I did today, my own thing. And I want you to know that like, this is how long it took me to achieve this. And if you want to achieve this, seek, a professional or whatever, but just know that it's not this, it's beyond what you just see. For me, I think it's a really hard question. There's no simple answer to say, is it the social media company's responsibility? Because I think there's just no way to do that in like a really fair manner. They just provide an open platform. But I do think there should be some training for kids. Like in school, we learn so many, like we learn math that we might not ever use. We learn science that we might not ever use. Social media is part of everyone, including these kids' everyday lives, and it's not going anywhere. It's only going to progress. There's going to become virtual reality. There's like all these things. I think that they should have some training in critical thinking, in media, in just learning to mindfully use these platforms and make good decisions. I think, at some point it is the ethics of the people who are posting and have this influence to understand the responsibility that they have, right? Like as any leader in the world, apart from maybe Trump, hopefully understood is like, what they say has power and influence, and you got to be really careful how you use that. And so, whenever I go to post something, I understand that, especially if it's on my platforms that I have a larger audience, it's okay, like, how do I use this for good? And also show the different sides. Like, even if I post something super maybe motivational, I want to show the sides of like, hey, if you take motivation from this, just also remember it involves balance in your life and caring about this. Don't, take it. It's like seeing things from different sides. Part of that, it comes with maturity, right? Now we're giving platforms to these young people who don't have the maturity yet to see things from different sides, and they're still figuring things out in the moment and posting it in the moment. And that's where I see a training should be in sense. Like it should be a course in school of how to just think about things a little differently. Like what you see might not be true. How do you critically think through these things? How do you research someone and figure out if what they're saying is real? Where to take your influence? Like kids should definitely learn that. So I guess I wouldn't say that it's the onus of the platforms themselves, but there should be some sort of training. Maybe that could be from the platforms. When you sign up, you have to go through some training of how to like consume your content more mindfully. But I can't believe that it's not in school. Like our school systems are so backdated. We're learning things that we never use. And then things we're all getting affected with mental health through social media and all these things. And we have no training on it at all.
Well, obviously, I'm in the area of, and this is going to show my age a little bit of MySpace. You open it, you put it down, and then you leave it alone for I don't know weeks, months, and obviously the big bad beast that it was it's over 15 years ago in this country, but Facebook comes along, boom, and I'm at university, and what I was doing before that came along, or what I did to actually make do with my time, I've got no idea, because now it's pretty much, I don't know. On average, I wouldn't want to guess how many times somebody opens their phone and looks at Facebook or one of the other social media platforms just because it's gives me something to do. Instagram, I'm very much like you. I was probably had a lot older than my years 20 years ago of you need to remember that whatever you put out there is not going away, and ultimately I've always thought, well, Can't put it. I can't say this. I can't say that. I can't say. Obviously, some people would like to know your opinion. So you saying about education. People in their 30s and beyond probably get used with the education because we're not accustomed to airing out, and I'll loosely put this term out, our dirty laundry. It's not normal to showcase what happens behind the scenes when you shut your door, because it's not conventional. It wasn't the norm for so long. That's where, for me, it's kind of a hard balance between, James as the individual and James as anybody listening to this and want to go into entrepreneurship, want to gain a bigger audience or influence. You are a brand, and ultimately people want to see that as one continuum. So for me, almost a 35-year-old, is very difficult, because it's like, as you probably can attest to, as going through sport, two different people. One person in sport, one person that family and friend, like close family and friends, will see. And now, because of social media, we don't want that. We don't want two versions of you. We want one. Or if you were talking about losing your identity, possibly multiple identities. Nope, there need to be one continual being, and we want no wavering differences. So that's for an individual, it's very difficult, because until you come to probably congruence with that, it's very difficult, because you'll be butting heads with yourself. Like, well, I don't want to showcase that, because of, most of the time for me, and I'll open up about this, is because I deem it as that's not entertaining. To me, that would be, if I was to consume that, that's boring. So why would anybody else want to watch that? But this is where, obviously, you will say to individuals, you don't know until you test it. So I'm still at that sticking point. It's like, well, that's boring to me. Obviously, Instagram went through a phase of people sharing their meals, and then people went off that to pretty much now it's like, well, we want to see that, but we don't want to see it in picture. We want to see it in video of you actually making the thing from start to finish. So I think it goes in cycles and very cyclical of, it's probably very difficult for you to say to somebody exactly as, well, you need to do this on point, because they evolve pretty much on a daily basis as, well, what worked last week probably won't work this week, and then so on.
Yeah. Well, good points. Like it definitely changes all the time. And I think definitely different generations have their different views. Like at first I was similar. Like when it started, I was like, okay, like, I'll show just my snowboarding and not this other stuff. But now I've come full circle where it's like, no, I'm going to be vulnerable and open up about more of my story and the things I go through. If I post like a workout, I might go through, like I might talk about how the pandemic has been hard for my motivation to continue the training, and, kind of just relate it back to what I'm going through, because I know a lot of people could be going through the same thing, rather than they might see I just posted workout and I'd be like, every day I work out, and they'll be like, oh, okay, like she's shaming us. We feel bad that we're not feeling this. And so just showing people, no, like I went through this too, and I am trying to overcome it. Like I'm dealing with, okay, maybe less motivation to do this, and showing people that makes them be like, okay, I could do this too. So it's more empowering them, rather than making them feel bad or comparing themselves against you. And that's where I see a big shift happening in social media, where before, like you said much earlier in this conversation, there was maybe like those people who are just putting out a fake life. And it was all about making people kind of feel like they wish they were them. Versus now, it's like, how about we empower people to make them feel like, as influencers, make other people feel like they can empower themselves and they want to be the best version of themselves, not be like us. And so that's where I see things shifting. Obviously, there's people still doing the other things, and there's people who aren't sharing and whatever. And I think it's just finding what's right for you and where you want to fit in, and depending on your goals or what you want to do, sharing that that aligns with that goal that you have.
Well, I think it always comes back to, the morals and ethics of an individual. It's what is your intent out of things? Because if I was to say, in all honesty, and I've never said this openly to anybody, even while you are a fellow podcaster, but be it in the confines of behind the camera, mine was a monetary. My end game with the podcast 4 or 5 years ago was monetary. Is, well, how am I going to create more revenue for the business? And I think as it evolved over the years, yes, there were times it was a slog. It's like, oh, I got to put this content out twice a week, as it was then, and then obviously it went down to one. And then I thought, well, you're not one of the big boys. You're not going to get one of these contracts from one of the companies. Don't try to be, and just enjoy the conversations that you're going to have over the course of what are we now 200 and say almost 250 episodes. So it's not been a long slog. When people hear some of these numbers, like, wow. But some of those people are just starting out. It's like just if you can get past, I can't remember what the average is. I think it's about 5 to 10 episodes. You'll find you're in it for the long haul, and pretty much there's no monetary gain to be had. I think I tried to work it out a couple of months ago as how much I actually spent on just hosting it and putting it out. So like, well, okay. And it's probably in the thousands, but I'm okay with that because if it helps one individual spark that motivation that they deem that they're lacking, I would say they might be they've probably just lost their way. And I use an analogy sometimes with my clients. If you don't lack your keys, you lose your keys. Obviously, you're going to find them eventually, or you're same with your phone. You put it down somewhere. I've mislaid it. You don't lack it. Probably do you some good for your mental health for the time you haven't got it, but obviously you're gonna find it, and then obviously you go from there. And as motivation is the same thing. It's pretty much ebbs and flows. I probably could, without asking you the question of did you ever have times throughout your career that it was up and down, the answer probably yes, and it's the same with me. People probably, I won't say surprised, but I did have teammates who would be banging on my door. Come on, James, let's go today. And then I'd reciprocate on a day that they're not feeling it. So I wasn't on it 100% of the time. I don't think you could be as a human being because, especially this time of the year, we don't have as bad of weather as you would do in Canada. But it's not the most enjoyable part of the year to be training, but it's got to be done because ultimately if you want the prize at the end of the rainbow, and I allude to your point that you mentioned before of solely focusing on that pot of gold, you do miss that enjoyment factor in between, which I did for a long time from my career. And ultimately looking back, yes, I have the pictures, yes, I have the memories, but did I truly soak it up and actually enjoy it? Not completely. And that would be me being honest. I got too fixated on pretty much, the win at all cost. If I coin it a different way from an entrepreneurial standpoint, the get rich quick scheme, and it what the process was. I have to do it. If I like it, I don't, or indifferent. You have to do it, and pretty much towards the end, I hated it, and I probably didn't get out soon. I either didn't reevaluate things correctly, which hindsight is 2020, or I didn't leave soon enough. And then people do ask, well, and I was asked this afternoon on another podcast, were there times where you could have done another game? Like, yes, but obviously circumstances. I blamed injury and other things. It wasn't. It was that. It was the mindset to get off the canvas just wasn't there. It's like, I'll give up. It's easier to do that and walk away. And then obviously you finger point to other things and say, well, those are the reasons why. And ultimately, it's soul searching at the end and finding your true identity was, well, I know me now. Probably wouldn't be very happy looking that person in the eye, and then the younger self would kind of be, well, why did you give up so easily? It's I didn't do it multiple times. Obviously, your sport, you've got to come back pretty like that in an instant the next run, whereas I have years and years, and it's taken probably people higher up in sport to kind of say, forget about it, James. You didn't go to Rio and you didn't go to Tokyo. Let it rest. It's all right that you coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, that people will say. It's all right that that didn't happen. You can let it rest. And I think hearing it from somebody else, it's all right. Okay, I can let it rest, and it doesn't need to weigh at you.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for sharing that, and I really relate to that deeply. I think that's important, and a great way of explaining it.
Well, I think people forget that they because you were talking about, the athletes are becoming more relatable and more, I won't use the term more human, but be it they're not these
showing their human side, I think.
Well, I think we are. I think we do, but we did it in private. Which
yeah,
I think
right.
Obviously, social media is like, well, we want to see some of that now, and I think the ones that have probably prospered from that, it showed all. I won't say all sides, but every ounce of recovery phase. You name it. It's like, oh, that's quite different. But then you say don't replicate it. It's doing it your way, but it's trying to find those tangibles. When the margins they get smaller and smaller, it becomes, I won't say difficult, but that's maybe where you've got to be inventive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think we're all human beings, not robots, and treating ourselves as such is beneficial. If you want to show that on social media too, that can be beneficial to relating to more people. But I think we're all just unique and individual, and we're all healing from different things for sure.
And that moves me nicely, Natalie, to my penultimate question to you. If you had to sit down with any athlete, dead or alive, for that matter, who would that be and why?
Whew. I think Muhammad Ali, just to learn about like all the things that he dealt with, how he made it, like he developed himself as an activist and more than an athlete. I would just love to learn about just the things that he's gone through off the boxing ring.
And my final question before we wrap up the episode, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Ooh. I would say just continue failing forward, learning, forgiving yourself, and figuring out a better way and sharing that with others once you've learned that better way.
So once again, Natalie, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Harth. An athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.